Hi everyone, it's Kathy, and today I am creating a card using the Caffeinated unicorn stamp from Rabbit Hole Designs, and I'll also be creating a background using the new Rainbow Turnabout stamp set by Concord 9th. I started out by stamping my little unicorn onto a piece of Cougar Super Smooth cardstock with My Favorite Things Extreme Black Hybrid ink, which both that cardstock and ink are currently my go-to for when I do Copic coloring. So a couple of things that I want to share with you in coloring this unicorn. First and foremost is her mane. I started out with RV00 and I just did little scribbly lines with that color. And I know it's a very, very light color and you really can't see it very well on screen. At least I don't think you can. I started out with that just to remind myself that I don't want to go over those areas with my darkest colors too much. The next color that I came in with was RV25. And with the RV25, I was able to just go right in and add the areas where it would be the darkest, particularly on her mane, on her forehead. When I moved over to the main part of her mane, where I had added in the RV00, I was doing tiny little flicks, and I'm using this color very sparingly. And I did flicks above and below where I had put the RV00, and I did flick into the RV00 just a tiny little bit. I was making sure to leave space between the RV25. You can kind of see how it's coming along here. There's stripes going on, and I know it looks really weird, but bear with me, it works out in the end. So after I was done with the RV25, I came in with RV14. I was blending out the RV25 with the RV14 by flicking further down. The next color I came in with was RV21, and I filled in the areas that I had left white previously and blended into the RV00 completely. At this point, there's already a lot of texture that was already drawn into her mane and her tail. And after I finished with the RV21, I realized that I didn't have quite enough contrast. I didn't have that scary dark color that Courtney Krieber likes to say. So I brought in the RV29 and added that pretty much where I had initially put the RV25. Then I came back with the RV25 and blended that out just a little bit more, still maintaining those pretty big highlight areas just to make sure that I didn't completely overtake with the dark, because I did want to have some highlights so that her hair or her mane looked sort of wavy. And I worked my way, to the RV14 and then down to the RV21. To really blend everything together. A little bit later, I do come back in and work on the mane a little bit more, just to add a little bit more texture, but we'll get there when we get there. For her robe, I thought if she's going to have a pink mane, then her robe should probably be a lovely teal, just because personally I like pink and teal together. So I started with BG49 and I just added in I just added that where the shadows would be the darkest, particularly down the back of her robe and along the collar and above the sleeve and below the sleeve. I'm not really concentrating on having a light source per se. I'm more concentrating on where the shadows would be the darkest. So with the BG49, I went in and I did really very fine lines first, just to make sure that that's where I really wanted those darkest areas to be. And then I flicked it out just a tiny little bit. The next color I came in with is BG32, and that is, it's my first mid-tone. And for the collar, I pretty much colored in the entire collar. I'm leaving a white space up at the very top, as well as towards the front of the collar, just to, again, maintain a nice highlight. One of the things with using BG49 and BG32 is that the BG32 will blend out the BG49 quite a bit. So Copics are nice because they can, obviously well, Copics are nice for a lot of reasons, but some of the main things that I really like about them is that A, they're transparent, and B, they can be layered. Now, in having said that, you do have to be careful with layering over and over and over, depending on what type of cardstock you are using. There are some cardstocks that perform better with Copics. I really like the Cougar Super Smooth because it's kind of a cross between the Neenah 80-pound Solar White and the Express-It cardstock. So it's kind of a nice blend of both. It's a little bit lighter weight, I think, than the Neenah 80-pound, but it lends itself very well to being able to add more and more layers. And having said that, I have noticed with the Cougar Super Smooth that if you keep adding layers on top of each other without giving that specific area a little bit of a break to allow the inks to really soak in and do their job, which is blend together, a lot of times the color will start to bleed outside of the stamped image. So I will stop, like Hermione is an example. I stopped with Hermione and then I'll go back and add in a little bit more just to make sure that I don't have that color start bleeding outside of the stamped lines. After I was done with her robe, I decided that her slippers, which by the way are narwhal slippers, so I colored them teal as well, although I only used BG49 and BG32 since they're pretty tiny, so not necessary to use more than 2 colors. And I'll be sure to have all of the supplies that I used as well as the Copic colors that I used listed in the description box below. So for the inside of her ear, I used R00 and R20, and then I moved on to coloring the actual unicorn. Now I wanted her to be white, but even white things have shadows. So I decided to use warm grays, and I started with W4, and again I was very light-handed with the W4 because I want to create shadows. I don't want to color her in. Next I came in with W2 and blended out the W4, and the areas that I concentrated the shadows are along the back side of her head at the bottom of her face where her robe would be casting a shadow on her face, and I did more of a shadow on her leg, that's the leg that's behind the front leg, just so there's a little bit of a definition between her 2 legs. Next I came in with W0 and blended out the W2, and I made sure to leave a lot of white space on her face. Again, I don't want to color her in, I just want to add in the shadows. I did color in the bags that are underneath her eye, just to make it look like she really still needs a lot more coffee. And I also added just a little bit of color to her eyelid with the W0 marker. For her little hoof, I used C7 and C5, which didn't really need to use 2. I could have just used the C7. Anyway, I colored in her hoof pretty quickly, and then I'm sure you noticed all of a sudden her little mug is colored in. And I didn't bother showing how I colored in the mug because I decided to try to get fancy with it and I ruined it. So we'll get back to the mug a little bit later. For her horn, all I did was use C3 and just kind of made the stamped lines a little bit thicker, especially where the horn would swirl a little bit. And then I blended that out with C1 a very tiny little bit, and then just blended all of that together with my colorless blender. And to accentuate even more that she's really tired, I decided to give her some bloodshot eyes. So I started with R20, and on each corner I just did a tiny little bit of that, and then I blended that towards the center with R00. And the bloodshot eyes was something that I had seen on another video from Renee over at Delaney Jane Cards, and I really liked how much it added to the image, so I thought I would give it a shot. And after adding in the bloodshot eye, I decided that the bags under her eyes needed to be a little bit darker, so I did go over that with the W2 marker. And of course, if I have the opportunity to add polka dots to anything, I'm going to do that. So I used my white gel pen to add polka dots to her robe. And here's a couple of tricks. There was a conversation that I had seen on a Facebook group that I'm a part of. And there was some conversation about white gel pens and which one is the best one. And of course, it's all a matter of personal preference. But for me, my personal preference for a white gel pen is the actual Jelly Roll pen. A trick with the white gel pens is, and I learned this from Sandy Allnock, is if you run the tip of the gel pen on your finger, that helps warm up the ink a little bit, so it'll flow a lot more easily. Another tip is, again, you don't want to put a whole lot of pressure down when you're using them. When I'm adding those dots to her robe, I'm literally barely touching the tip and kind of moving the tip in a tiny little circle. That allows the ink to get past that little ball bearing that's in the tip, because it is a ballpoint pen. Anywho, back to the card. I did come back to her mane with RV21 and lightened up some of the areas that I thought were just a little bit too dark, and it was really just kind of blending some areas out a little bit more. And then I came in with the RV29 and literally traced over the stamped line where the part of her tail and her mane were more curly, just to accentuate those curls. Then I came back in and quickly went over the RV29 with RV21. After I was done adding all the details to her robe, I decided to fix my little coffee mug, because I had, with my white gel pen, tried to get fancy and draw a heart, and it didn't work. So I decided I'm just gonna stamp a new mug. So that's what I did, and then I did color her hoof a second time, again using C7 and C5, which I don't know why I insisted on using two colors a second time, because it's really not necessary. That's neither here nor there. And then I moved on to coloring in the mug, and this time I used C3, C1, and my colorless blender. For the coffee that's in the cup, I just used E29 and E25. Really wasn't trying to get too fancy with that because it was such a small little area. And I had some other sparkly glittery gel pens in my stash. I've had them for a really, really long time. So I thought that since I was going to be using the rainbow Turnabout stamp from Concord 9th, I was going to hand draw a tiny little rainbow on her coffee mug. And I didn't have to worry about the rainbow being completely precise, because the Turnabout stamp, they're kind of, it's not a perfectly, it's a more whimsical rainbow. That's what I'm trying to say. If I could spit the words out, that would help. So after I added my little rainbow, I did fussy cut the coffee mug, and then I glued it into place on top of the original coffee mug. Now here's the tip. If you're going to cut something like that, that's that small, don't go making yourself crazy by trying to cut around the handle on the coffee mug. That's why I colored her hoof a second time, because it's easier just to cut off the hoof and paper piece that on top of the original one than to try and cut around the small handle of that coffee mug. So that finishes up the coloring, and then I move on to the background. And with the Turnabout stamps, there are plenty of videos on how to set them up. So I'm not going to go into all of that, but I would definitely recommend that if you're going to use Turnabout stamps, that you go ahead and purchase the Turnabout jig as well. It just makes life a lot easier when using the Turnabout stamps. Anywho, the inks that I used are My Favorite Things Lemon Chiffon, Memento Angel Pink, LuLu Lavender, and I started with My Favorite Things Snow Cone, but it turned out to be too light, so I switched over to My Favorite Things Summer Splash. And I wanted to make sure that the rainbow background was more pastel, because I didn't want it to compete with the unicorn too much. When I use the Turnabout stamps, I do like to stamp the image 2 times with each color, just to make sure that I get a really crisp impression. The biggest thing, of course, with the Turnabout stamps is you do want to make sure that you clean off the stamp in between ink colors, and you definitely want to remember to turn that jig. There was one where I almost didn't, and I caught myself just in time. Once I had that all done, I did run that through my Gemini Junior with a stitched rectangle die from My Favorite Things, and I adhered that to a piece of teal cardstock that I had also run through my die cut machine with another stitched rectangle die that was just slightly larger. I did die cut the unicorn using an oval die, and then I die cut a piece of teal cardstock from a scalloped oval die. The sentiment I stamped on teal cardstock with VersaMark ink and used detail white embossing powder, and I did run that through my die cut machine with my favorite fishtail banner die from Blueprints 27. I put a bunch of foam tape on the backside of the unicorn just to pop that up a little bit. I used liquid glue to adhere the sentiment strip down. I added a little bit of sparkle to the unicorn horn with my Wink of Stella glitter pen, and then came in with white Blizzard Nouveau glitter drops and just added a few of those around the background. And that is it. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, I'd love it if you would. And don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified every time a new video is posted. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.